The war lasted 6 months, but it was unlike any conflict the galaxy had ever seen. There were no burned worlds, no destroyed fleets, no refugee camps filled with the displaced. Instead, there was transformation on a scale that defied comprehension, Captain. Sung-woo stood on the bridge of his ship, the frontier edge, watching the surrender ceremony of the Council fleet. Admiral Zareth, the ancient warrior, had commanded Council forces for over 2 centuries, but today he was laying down his weapons not in defeat, but in wonder. Admiral Zareth Sung-woo said, extending his hand, "We do not want your surrender, we want your freedom. Join us and help us build something neither of us could create alone." The alien admiral looked at the offered hand for a long moment. His species had evolved from predators who settled disputes through combat. The concept of victory without domination was difficult to understand, but the evidence was overwhelming. Humans had achieved something impossible. They had won a war by refusing to fight. "ID commanded this fleet to destroy your rebellion," Zareth said slowly, "but I find instead that you have shown us a new way to live. Your colonies thrive without oppression. Your people work together without coercion. Your civilization grows without conquest. How is this possible?" Sung-woo smiled. "It is possible because we stopped believing that someone must lose for someone else to win. We stopped believing that resources are limited when knowledge is shared. We stopped believing that control is necessary when cooperation is offered freely around them." The great transformation continued. Council ships were being retrofitted with human technology, not as spoils of war, but as gifts freely given. Human engineers worked alongside alien crews, teaching them about energy systems that turned matter into pure power, propulsion drives that folded space itself, communication arrays that could send messages across galactic distances instantly. But the real transformation was happening in the minds of beings who had lived under Council rule for thousands of years. They were discovering what it felt like to make choices without asking permission, to explore without filing reports, to dream without limitations. Dr. Yejin stood before the emergency session of what remained of the Galactic Council. The great chamber was half empty as species after species had joined the human alliance. But those who remained were finally ready to listen. "The table you tried to chain US2 has been replaced," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We offer you seats at a new table where every voice matters, where every species contributes according to their abilities and receives according to their needs." Speaker Thylex, his crystalline form dim with exhaustion, spoke for the first time in weeks. "What assurance do we have that this new order will not become another tyranny? What prevents humans from becoming the new rulers of the Galaxygen?" Smiled gently. "The same thing that prevented us from accepting your tyranny, the belief that no one species has the right to rule another. The conviction that the galaxy is big enough for everyone to find their own paths." She gestured to the holographic displays, showing the expanding human alliance, dozens of species working together not under human rule but as equal partners, each contributing their unique strengths, each learning from the others, each growing in ways that would have been impossible under the old restrictions. "We do not seek to replace the Council," she continued. "We seek to make it irrelevant. We offer something better than authority. Partnership rather than domination, cooperation rather than control, freedom rather than security." The transformation spread across the galaxy like dawn breaking over a new world. Trade networks that had been rigid for millennia became fluid and dynamic. Species that had been locked into assigned roles discovered they had talents the Council had never allowed them to develop on the former manufacturing world of Centauri Prime. Workers who had spent centuries making the same products over and over were now designing ships that could cross between dimensions. Artists who had been forced to create only approved cultural works were painting murals that captured the dreams of entire species. The Morphin colonies that had rebelled against Council tribute were now sending ships to explore the galactic core regions that had been forbidden. For 10,000 years, their discoveries were changing everything anyone had believed about the galaxy. Ancient ruins that predated the Council were found on dozens of worlds, evidence of civilizations that had existed long before the current galactic order, technological artifacts that suggested the galaxy had once been home to beings of incredible advancement. The humans had been right. The galaxy was much older, much more diverse, and much more wonderful than the Council had ever admitted. There were layers of history that had been ignored, mysteries that had been forbidden, truths that had been hidden. Darjayan led the expedition that made the most startling discovery of all in the galactic core where council ships had never traveled. They found a vast library left behind by the galaxy's first civilization. The archives contained the complete history of galactic development, and the records showed something incredible. The council had not been the first galactic government there. Had been others before them. Each had risen to power, promising order and security. Each had eventually become rigid and controlling. Each had eventually fallen when their subjects discovered that freedom was possible. The pattern had repeated itself. Across millions of years, ancient species rising to rule the galaxy, younger species eventually rebelling and creating something new. The cycle of control and liberation was as old as the galaxy itself, but the humans had broken the pattern. Instead of replacing the council with another version of the same system, they had created something entirely different. A network of cooperation rather than a hierarchy of control. A galaxy where no one ruled because everyone was free. Elder Byung-ho sat in his garden on New Earth, one of hundreds of human worlds scattered across the outer rim. His grandchildren gathered around him as he told them the story of how their species had walked away from the council table. They thought abandoning their table would destroy us, he said with a smile that held decades of satisfaction. They never understood that we were builders. We did not need their table. We could build our own and make it big enough for everyone. The children listened with wide eyes as their grandfather described the galaxy that had existed before the Great Exodus, a place where permissions were required for everything, where species were limited by the 6 months had passed since the humans walked out of the Galactic Council chambers. 6 long months without a single human ship appearing anywhere in council space. At first the aliens celebrated like they had won some great victory. Trade routes that humans used to travel were quickly taken over by alien corporations. The Vorthek Empire moved their warships into systems where human colonies used to ask for protection. Counselor Vex Rand stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, looking out at a system that used to have human mining operations. Now it belonged to the Vorthek. The mining stations were bigger, and the workers were all alien slaves. Instead of free human employees, this was how things should be, he thought, the strong taking from the weak. But something strange was happening in the dark spaces between the stars. Pirates who had terrorized merchant ships for hundreds of years were disappearing. Not just their ships, but entire pirate fleets would vanish without sending any distress signals. The Crimson Reapers had been the most feared pirate group in the galaxy for 50 years. Then one day they were just gone. Their fortress asteroid was found empty with no signs of battle. The Nexus Collective was having even stranger problems. 3 of their major processing stations had simply vanished overnight. These were massive facilities, each one the size of a small moon, heavily defended with robot warships and energy shields that could stop anything. But when the Nexus sent investigation teams to check on them, they found nothing but empty space. The Robot Collective tried to keep this information secret, but word spread quickly through the underground information networks. Something or someone was picking off heavily defended targets without leaving any evidence behind. The attacks were too precise, too clean to be the work of ordinary pirates. Lee So Young was one of the few humans still living in council space. She worked as an engineer on Kreshtar, a neutral trading station that served merchants from all over the galaxy. She had stayed behind to finish transferring some important equipment to human space, but the work was taking longer than expected. What she noticed first were the prices. Human-made medical scanners that used to cost 50 credits were now selling for 150 credits. Fusion batteries that humans invented were being traded like precious gems. Atmospheric processors that could turn dead worlds into gardens were worth more than entire starships. The alien merchants would approach her quietly in the station corridors, asking if she knew where they could buy human technology. They offered incredible amounts of money for things that used to be common trade items, but Lee So-young had no access to human supply lines anymore. Her own people had cut off all contact with council space on Earth. President Choi Min-ki sat in a deep underground bunker beneath the city of Seoul. The bunker was hidden 3 kilometers below the surface, protected by layers of armor and energy shields that could survive a direct hit from a planet-killer weapon. He was meeting with Admiral Park Seung-ho, the head of Earth Defense Forces. The screens around them showed star maps with hundreds of red dots marking alien fleet positions, the Council thought. Earth was defenseless, just one little blue planet with primitive weapons. They had no idea what humans had been building in secret for the past 20 years. Our sleeper colonies are all operational now, Admiral Park reported. These were secret human settlements hidden in remote systems that the Council had never discovered. Each one was completely self-sufficient with its own shipyards, weapons, factories, and defensive fleets. The aliens think we only have a few dozen colonies, but we actually have over 200. President Choi smiled as he looked at the reports. The Kepler sector shipyards just finished their first battle cruiser. It's bigger than anything the Vorthak have and completely invisible to their sensors. Our stealth technology is 50 years ahead of theirs. The Admiral pulled up another display showing alien fleet movements. They are starting to get nervous, Sir. 3 more Council fleets have gone missing this week. Our ghost ships are doing excellent work. The aliens don't even know what hit them. The ghost ships were Admiral Park's pride and joy. Human vessels that could appear and disappear like phantoms. They would strike quickly, disable enemy ships, take whatever they needed, and vanish before anyone could respond. The crews of attack ships would wake up hours later with no memory of what happened, and no way to track their attackers but Admiral Park. Sung Ho was most proud of their new allies. The species that the Council had rejected or enslaved were very grateful when humans offered them friendship and protection. The Keepers had shared ancient technologies. The free traders gave humans access to secret routes through space. Even some of the machine species had joined the human alliance after the Nexus Collective tried to enslave them. President Choi stood up and walked to the biggest screen, which showed a real-time image of Earth from space. The planet looked peaceful and blue, but hidden in the asteroid belt were massive defense platforms, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. The moon had been hollowed out and turned into a fortress. The aliens saw one little planet, but they were actually looking at the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. The Council thinks we are hiding in our system, licking our wounds. President Choi said they have no idea we have been preparing for this possibility for decades. While they were laughing at us in their fancy meetings, we were building the largest military force the galaxy has ever seen. Admiral Park nodded. The best part is they did this to themselves. If they had treated us fairly, we would have been happy to stay. As junior members of their club, we would have shared our technology and helped them explore new worlds, but they chose to push us out. So now we have to do things our way. The Admiral activated another screen showing production reports from human industrial worlds. Shipyards were working around the clock building new vessels. Weapons factories were producing energy cannons that could crack planets in half. Research stations were developing technologies that seemed like magic even to human scientists. We have been recruiting their best people too, Admiral Park continued. Alien scientists, engineers, and military officers who were tired of the Council caste system. Many species are not happy being treated as second-class citizens. They are very interested in joining our alliance. President Choi thought about all the times human diplomats had been insulted and humiliated by Council representatives, all the times alien leaders had treated humans like primitive children who needed to be controlled. Now, those same aliens were about to discover what happened when you made enemies of the most innovative species in the galaxy. Meanwhile, on the edge of Vorthak space, Captain Yoon Hae-jin commanded the human stealth ship Silent Thunder. They had been tracking a Vorthak supply convoy for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The convoy was carrying medical supplies that had been stolen from human colonies. The Silent Thunder was invisible to all sensors, completely silent and armed with weapons that could disable ships without destroying them. Captain Yoon gave the order and his crew went to work. Within minutes, the entire convoy was dead in space. The Vorthak crews were unconscious and the stolen medical supplies were transferred to human ships. As the Silent Thunder vanished back into the darkness, Captain Yoon left behind a message beacon broadcasting in several languages. Contract terminated due to breach of humanitarian clauses. The Vorthak would find their ships floating empty with no idea what had happened to them. All across Council space, similar attacks were happening every day. Mining operations that had taken over human territory would simply disappear. Alien corporations that had stolen human trade routes would lose entire fleets. Trading posts that refused to deal with humans would wake up to find their warehouses Empty, the pattern was becoming clear to anyone who was paying attention. Every alien group that had voted against human requests in the council was being systematically targeted. Every corporation that had cut ties with humanity was losing money and resources. The attacks were precise, surgical, and completely untraceable, but the council members were too proud to admit they had made a mistake. They kept telling themselves that the attacks were random, that there was no connection to their treatment of humanity. They refused to believe that the weak, primitive humans could be responsible for such sophisticated operations. They would learn the truth soon enough. Councillor Thran was sitting in his private chambers reading reports about Vorthek expansion when his aide burst through the door. The young Vorthek soldier looked terrified, his scales pale and his breathing rapid. Thran did not like being interrupted, especially when he was planning which human colonies to conquer next. Sir, we have a major problem, the aide gasped. The Kronos Mining Consortium, they are Gonetheks. Ran looked up from his reports with annoyance. The Kronos Mining Consortium was one of the largest operations in Vorthek space. They controlled 47 mining platforms in the Helix Nebula and employed over 10,000 workers. What do you mean gone? He growled. Gone, sir, vanished. The aide activated a holographic display showing empty space where the mining operation used to be. 47 platforms, 6 refineries, their main administrative station, everything. Just empty space. The only thing left was this. The aide played a recording of a message beacon broadcasting in multiple languages, including human, Korean, Chinese, and English. The message was simple and terrifying: contract terminated due to breach of humanitarian clauses. Thex Ran stared at the display, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. The Kronos operation had been worth billions of credits. It took 50 years to build and was protected by a full battle fleet. How could it just disappear? And why was the message in human languages? Similar reports were flooding in from across council space. The Zelani Federation lost 3 major shipping hubs in one night. The trade stations simply vanished, leaving only empty space and message beacons. The Nexus Collective discovered that 5 of their research facilities had been completely stripped of technology and personnel, again with no signs of battle or struggle. Attacks were happening everywhere, but they all followed the same pattern. The targets were always operations that had somehow been connected to anti-human policies. The attackers never identified themselves, but they left behind evidence of technology far beyond anything in council databases: ships that could become completely invisible to all sensors, weapons that could disable entire fleets without destroying them, boarding parties that could infiltrate the most secure facilities without triggering any alarms. Jung Hai-jin sat in her office on Earth reading intercepted council communications. The aliens were finally starting to panic. Their military leaders were holding emergency meetings trying to figure out who was responsible for the attacks. Their intelligence services were working around the clock, analyzing the few clues left behind, but Jung Hai-jin knew something the council did not. She knew that humanity had spent decades developing technology in secret, while the aliens were focused on controlling trade routes and political power. Humans had been solving the really hard problems. Faster than light travel that did not require the council jump gate, network energy weapons that could cut through any known armor, stealth systems that made ships invisible to every type of sensor. The human government had learned an important lesson from their treatment by the council. Never again would humanity be dependent on alien technology or alien permission to exist in the galaxy. Every human colony now had hidden manufacturing facilities that could build everything from medical supplies to warships. Every human ship carried weapons and defenses that alien scientists thought were impossible. Jung Hai-jin opened a secure communication channel to Admiral Park Sung-ho, who was commanding the Ghost Fleet operations from a hidden base in the Kepler sector. How are our friends in the council doing, Admiral? She asked with a smile. They are starting to understand the consequences of their choices, Admiral Park replied. The Vorthek lost another supply depot last night. The Zelani trade convoy that was carrying stolen human art disappeared completely, and the Nexus facility on Zarian Prime found all their computer systems wiped clean. Admiral paused to check his reports. We estimate that council military and economic strength has dropped by 30% in the last 2 months. Their insurance companies are refusing to cover operations in contested space. Their trade routes are becoming too dangerous to use. Many of their member species are starting to ask questions about why these attacks only target anti-human operations. Jung Haijin nodded with satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. Humanity was not trying to destroy the Council. They were simply making it very expensive to be their enemy. Every alien corporation that had cut ties with humans was losing money. Every government that had voted against human proposals was losing territory and resources. The beauty of the strategy was that it gave the aliens a choice. They could continue to treat humanity as an enemy and watch their civilization slowly crumble, or they could admit their mistake and try to rebuild the relationship they had destroyed. But Jung Haijin knew that alien pride would make the second option very difficult. On the Nexus Collective Homeworld Unit Prime Designate 001 was analyzing the pattern of attacks with growing alarm. The machine intelligence that controlled the Nexus was one of the most advanced artificial minds in the galaxy. It could process information faster than any organic brain and see patterns that others missed. The analysis was clear. These attacks were not random acts of piracy or terrorism. They were part of a coordinated campaign being carried out by a force with technology and organization far beyond what the Council possessed. The attackers knew exactly which targets to hit for maximum economic and psychological impact. They had detailed intelligence about Council operations and perfect timing for their strikes. Most disturbing of all, the attacks were escalating every week. They became more sophisticated and struck deeper into Council territory. The attackers were learning, adapting, and growing stronger with each operation. Unit Prime calculated that at the current rate of loss, the Council would lose effective control of outer space within 18 months. The machine intelligence sent an urgent communication to all Council members warning significant threat detected. Recommend immediate diplomatic action to identify and neutralize source of attacks. Current trajectory indicates total strategic defeat within 2 years, but the Council members were too proud to listen to warnings from a machine, even one as advanced as Unit Prime. They preferred to believe that the attacks were the work of some unknown alien species that could be defeated with traditional military force. They refused to consider the possibility that the weak, primitive humans might be responsible. Truth was becoming obvious to anyone willing to see it. The humans had not crawled away to hide in their home system, as the Council expected. Instead, they had used their exile as an opportunity to build something new and dangerous. They had gathered allies, recruited the best minds from across the galaxy, and developed technologies that made them more powerful than any single Council member. The aliens had wanted to put humanity in their place. They had succeeded beyond their worst nightmares. Humanity now knew exactly what their place was in the galaxy. They were not junior partners begging for acceptance. They were not primitive children who needed alien guidance. They were the species that other civilizations would learn to fear and respect, and the lesson was just beginning. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any meeting in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives who usually spent their time arguing about trade regulations and territory disputes were now huddled together like frightened children. The great chamber that had once echoed with arrogant laughter was filled with whispered conversations and nervous energy. Counselor Vex Neri of the Zelani Federation stood at the main podium, her usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Her blue skin had turned pale and her forearms shook as she held her speech notes. The Zelani were known throughout the galaxy for their merchant skills and economic power, but even they were struggling to survive the mysterious attacks. Fellow Council members, she began, her voice cracking, we must face the reality of our situation. Our shipping losses have reached 30% across all major trade routes. Half of our mining operations in contested space have gone completely dark. The economic damage is approaching catastrophic levels. She activated a holographic display showing the latest casualty reports. Every day brought news of more disappearances, more empty facilities, more message beacons broadcasting warnings. In human languages, the pattern was unmistakable, but most Council members still refused to admit what everyone was thinking. Our insurance companies are refusing to cover any operations outside core systems. Vex Neri continued. Banks are calling in loans that were backed by mining facilities that no longer exist. 3 major shipping corporations have declared bankruptcy this week alone. If this continues much longer, our entire economic system will collapse. Angry voices filled the chamber. As representatives began shouting over each other, some demanded military action against the unknown attackers. Others insisted that this was all coincidence, that there was no organized campaign against the council, but the loudest voice belonged to Councillor Thex Ran of the Vorthek Empire. This is obviously the work of those pathetic humans, he roared from his floating platform. The cowards are too weak to face us in open battle, so they resort to terrorism and sabotage. We should launch a full-scale invasion of their home system and end this once and for all. The chamber erupted in supporting roars and war cries. Many of the council members had built their careers on the idea that military force could solve any problem. The thought that someone might be outsmarting them was too painful to accept. They preferred to believe that overwhelming firepower would make their problems disappear. But one voice cut through the noise like a knife through silk. When Keeper Delegate Nim Era spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. Her species was older than the council itself. They had seen civilizations rise and fall across millions of years. When a keeper chose to speak, others listened. Councillor Thex Ran, she said in a voice like ancient wisdom, your military sent a task force to scout the human home system last month. What did they find? The chamber became absolutely silent. Thex Ran's scaled face turned dark red with embarrassment and rage. He had hoped to keep that mission classified, but somehow the ancient keeper knew about it anyway. I don't know what you're talking about, he growled. The scouting mission consisted of 50 heavy cruisers and 3 dreadnoughts. Nim Era continued calmly. They were ordered to assess human defenses and report back on potential invasion targets. They returned after only 6 hours. What did they find? Councillor Every representative in the chamber was staring at Thex Ran now, waiting for his answer. The truth was classified at the highest levels, but the pressure was becoming unbearable. Finally, he activated his own display, showing blurry sensor readings from the scouting mission. The human system is more heavily defended than we initially calculated, he admitted reluctantly. They appear to have constructed several defensive installations that were not present in our previous intelligence reports. Nim Era smiled, a cold expression that sent chills through the watching aliens. Several installations, she repeated. Please show the council what your scouts actually discovered. The display changed to show detailed sensor logs from the Vorthek scouting fleet. What the aliens saw made many of them gasp in shock. The human home system was surrounded by massive defensive platforms, each one larger than a Vorthek dreadnought. The platforms were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, creating overlapping fields of fire that could destroy entire invasion fleets. But that was not the most frightening part. The human ships that appeared on sensors looked like nothing in any council database. They moved without visible engines, accelerated at impossible speeds, and seemed to phase in and out of normal space like ghosts. Some of the readings suggested that human vessels could travel faster than light without using jump gates, something that council scientists insisted was impossible. Most disturbing of all, the human defenses had detected the Vorthek scouts immediately and allowed them to observe for exactly 6 hours before politely escorting them to the edge of the system. The message was clear. Humans could have destroyed the entire scouting fleet, but chose not to. They were showing mercy. The humans aren't hiding, Nim Era continued in her ancient voice. They are building. While we celebrated their departure from these chambers, they were preparing for complete independence from our civilization. They no longer need our trade routes, our protection, or our approval. She gestured to the display showing human ship designs. That seemed to violate several laws of physics. Council members who had built careers on understanding alien technology were staring at vessels that made no sense. Ships with no visible weapons that could somehow disable entire fleets, engines that produced no exhaust signature but could accelerate faster than anything in space. Hull designs that seemed to bend light around them, making them nearly invisible. The humans have done more than withdraw from our council. Nim Era said they have withdrawn from our understanding of what is possible. They are operating with technologies that surpass our best efforts by decades or perhaps centuries. Councillor Vex Nari found her voice again. But how is this possible? 6 months ago they were begging us for permission to send medical supplies to their colonies. They seemed so primitive, so dependent on our goodwill. Nim Era turned her ancient eyes toward the Zolani representative. That was their mistake, she said sadly. They assumed that asking for Help meant they were weak. They confused politeness with helplessness. Now they have learned that cooperation was a choice, not a necessity. The Old Keeper activated her own display, showing intelligence reports that made the council members even more uncomfortable. Human colonies were appearing in systems that had never been explored before. Human ships were making contact with independent species that the council had never heard of. Most shocking of all, several minor council members had quietly opened diplomatic channels with humanity, seeking separate peace agreements. The humans are not just surviving their exile from our council, Nimara concluded, they are thriving. They have built an alternative power structure that offers better terms to anyone willing to join them, trade deals that favor the smaller species, protection agreements that don't require tribute payments, technology sharing that benefits everyone instead of just the strongest. She paused and looked around the chamber at the faces of representatives who were finally beginning to understand what they had created. We tried to put humanity in their proper place, she said quietly. We succeeded beyond our worst fears. Their proper place turns out to be at the head of their own galactic alliance, one that treats its members as equals instead of subjects. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the full implications of their situation became clear. The council had not just made an enemy, they had created a competitor, one that was already proving more attractive to many species than the old system of dominance and control. Counselor Vex Ran was the first to break the silence. We still have superior numbers, he insisted. Our combined fleets could overwhelm any human defenses if we acted together. Era smiled again, but this time with something that might have been pity. Counselor, she said, how many of your fleets are still missing? Minister Quan Tae-yang was reviewing agricultural reports from New Sol Colony when the emergency communication arrived. A message bore the official seal of the Galactic Council, something that had not been seen in human government offices for over a year. He almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of him. The message was carefully worded to avoid any admission of wrongdoing. The council requested renewed diplomatic dialogue and expressed interest in mutual cooperation agreements. Minister Quan could not help but smile at the formal language that danced around the truth. They were begging, but trying to make it sound like a business proposal. He forwarded the message to President Choi Min-ki with a note. This is what desperation looks like when it wears a diplomatic uniform. The president response came back within minutes. Send Captain Oh Min-ho with the Soul Pride full formal escort. Let them see what human diplomacy looks like when we hold the stronger hand. Captain Oh Min-ho had been waiting for this moment ever since the day the human delegation walked out of the council chambers. He commanded one of the new Soul-class destroyers, a ship that represented everything humanity had accomplished. In their year of independence, the Soul Pride was twice the size of the largest council warship, but moved through space like a dancer. When the Soul Pride arrived at the main council station, the aliens scrambled to arrange proper reception ceremonies. The same beings who had laughed at human requests for medical supplies now lined up in full-dress uniforms to welcome a single human ship. Captain O watched through his bridge windows as alien dignitaries tried to outdo each other in showing respect. The reception committee included representatives from every major council species, including several who had personally voted against human proposals during the peace talks. They stood in perfectly arranged rows, wearing their finest ceremonial robes and holding banners of welcome that had been hastily prepared. Overnight, Captain O stepped off his ship wearing the new uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps. The design was simple but impressive: black fabric with silver trim and rank insignia that seemed to glow with their own light. His honor guard consisted of 12 human marines in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. The alien dignitaries bowed and scraped as Captain O walked past them toward the council chambers. Some of them tried to make small talk, but he ignored them completely. His instructions were clear: make them wait, make them wonder, and make them understand that humanity was no longer interested in begging for acceptance. The council chamber had been prepared for a full formal session with all 848 representatives present. The same aliens who had voted against human medical aid now sat in nervous silence, waiting to hear what humanity wanted from them. Captain O walked to the central podium, the same place where Ambassador Kim Dae-ho had made his final speech a year earlier. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. The humans had returned to the same spot where they had been humiliated, but now they held all the power. Fellow beings, Captain O began using the traditional council greeting that he delivered with perfect pronunciation. Humanity has received your request for renewed diplomatic contact, and we appreciate your interest in dialogue. He activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of the galaxy. The image revealed something that made many council members gasp in shock. Human influence had spread far beyond what anyone had imagined. In just 1 year, humanity had established formal diplomatic relations with over 200 independent systems, many of which had never been council members. However, Captain O continued, we are no longer the same species that sought your approval 12 months ago. We have found our own path among the stars and discovered that the galaxy is much larger than your council represents. The display changed to show the extent of human exploration and expansion. New colonies appeared as green dots scattered across previously unexplored regions of space. Each dot represented a world that humanity had claimed and developed without asking permission from anyone. The total number was staggering: 47 new colonies established. Captain O announced, reading from his prepared statement. 6 major shipyards constructed, 12 independent species welcomed as formal allies. 3 new trade routes opened through previously uncharted space. All of this accomplished without a single council permit or approval. Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the chamber. The aliens had assumed that humanity was hiding in their home system, licking their wounds. Instead, the humans had been building an empire that dwarfed anything the council controlled. The display shifted again to show military strength comparisons. Human fleet numbers had grown by over 300% in 12 months. The ships themselves were larger, faster, and more advanced than anything in council space. Some of the vessel designs seemed to violate known laws of physics, but the most shocking revelation was saved for last. The hologram showed a list of former council members who had quietly switched sides over the past year. 23 species had withdrawn from the council and joined the Human Alliance. Others were negotiating secret agreements that would give them access to human technology and protection. We understand that recent events have created some economic difficulties for council members, Captain O said with false sympathy. We are prepared to offer assistance in the form of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. He paused to let that sink in before delivering the terms that made the chamber erupt in outraged protest. The terms are simple: restricted trade rights for council members, with all transactions subject to human oversight. Tribute payments of 20% of gross domestic product for safe passage through human-controlled space. Immediate surrender of all military technologies that we deem dangerous to galactic peace, and formal recognition of human sovereignty over all systems we currently control. The alien representatives began shouting and roaring in anger. How dare the humans demand tribute from species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years? The idea that primitive Earth creatures could dictate terms to ancient civilizations was unbearable. Captain O waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. These terms are of course negotiable, he said. With a smile that did not reach his eyes, we learned diplomacy from the finest teachers in the galaxy. After all, you spent months showing us exactly how these negotiations should be conducted. The reference to their treatment of human diplomats was unmistakable. Several council members looked embarrassed, but most were too angry to feel shame. They had been outmaneuvered by a species they considered inferior, and the humiliation burned like acid. Counselor Thex rose from his platform, his scales bristling with rage. You dare to threaten us, he roared. Your pathetic species will regret this arrogance. We have fleets that could turn your worlds to ash. Captain O nodded politely. I am sure you do, Counselor. However, I should mention that your military conducted a reconnaissance of our home system several months ago. Perhaps you could share those findings with your colleague Wests. Ramface went pale as he realized that his secret scouting mission was no longer secret. The humans had known about it all along and had allowed it to happen. They wanted the council to see their defenses, to understand what they would be facing in any military confrontation. The truth was that humanity no longer feared the council fleets. They had technologies that made traditional warfare obsolete, weapons that could disable ships without destroying them, defensive systems that could protect entire star systems from invasion, and most importantly, they had allies who were tired of Council dominance and ready to support a better alternative. Captain O began walking toward the exit, having delivered his message. The Council could accept human terms and try to rebuild their relationship, or they could continue on their current path toward irrelevance. The choice was theirs. He reached the great doors. He turned back for one final statement. Oh, and counselors, he said casually, the humans you knew 12 months ago, those desperate people begging for medical supplies for their children. They want you to know that those children are healthy, now safe in colonies you never knew existed, protected by fleets you never saw coming. He smiled one last time before walking through the doors. We learned something important from our time in these chambers. Captain O called back. The galaxy is much bigger than this room, and there are many species out there who prefer partnership to domination. The doors closed behind him, leaving the Council representatives alone with the knowledge that their 1,000-year reign as the dominant power in the galaxy was coming to an end. Humanity had given them the same choice they had once given to others: submit or be left behind. The irony was perfect. 2 years had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The old order, where ancient alien civilizations controlled everything through fear and bureaucracy, was crumbling. Independent worlds that had been forced into Council membership were discovering they had choices now, better choices. Daryun G. stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, the largest diplomatic facility that humanity had ever built. The station was positioned at the intersection of 5 major trade routes, serving as a neutral meeting ground for species from across the galaxy. Through the massive, transparent aluminum windows, she could watch ships from dozens of different civilizations docking for trade negotiations and cultural exchanges. Many of these species had never been welcome in Council space. The keepers, who were too ancient and wise for Council politics, the free traders who refused to pay Council tribute fees, the Machine Liberation Front, whose artificial intelligences were considered dangerous by the Nexus Collective. All of them found friendship and partnership at human stations. Small transport ship was approaching the docking bay carrying delegates from the Spiral Confederation, a group of 12 species that had just voted to leave the Council and join the Human Alliance. The Confederation controlled nearly 30 systems, and their decision had sent shock waves through Council space. Daryun remembered when such a sight would have been impossible just 2 years ago. Humans were treated as primitive children who needed alien permission for everything. Now they were the leaders of an alliance that included over 400 star systems and was growing larger every week. The transformation had been remarkable, but not entirely peaceful. The Council had tried military action several times in the first year. Each attempt ended in disaster for the alien fleets. Human ships would appear out of nowhere, disable the attackers, and vanish again, leaving behind unconscious crews and message beacons, explaining exactly why their military operation had failed eventually. Even the most warlike Council species learned that attacking humans was like trying to fight ghosts. You could never find them when you wanted to fight, but they could find you whenever they chose to strike. The Council military advantage that had kept the galaxy in line for centuries became useless against an enemy they could not see coming. Ambassador Kim Dae-ho now held the title of President of the Independent Worlds Alliance and was preparing for his morning briefing. The alliance had grown far beyond what anyone thought possible when it started as a simple rejection of Council authority. Now it represented nearly half the inhabited galaxy and controlled the most advanced technology that anyone had ever seen. The daily reports made for interesting reading. 3 more Council species had requested admission to the Alliance this week. The Vorthic Empire was facing massive internal rebellions as their subject species learned about the freedom available in human space. Even the Nexus Collective had begun secret negotiations after losing most of their territory to liberated machine intelligences. President Kim looked at the communication from his old friend Nim Era, the Keeper delegate who had been the only Council member to support humanity during those dark days in the Council chambers. She had requested a private meeting to discuss something she called a final reconciliation. The irony was not lost on him. The same Council that had laughed at human requests for medical supplies was now begging for humanitarian aid. Their economy was collapsing as more species joined the human alliance. Their military was useless against enemies they could not find. Their political system was falling apart as member species discovered they had better options, but President Kim was not interested. In revenge, he had learned something important during humanity's exile from Council space. The best way to defeat your enemies was to make them irrelevant. Building something better than what they offered was more effective than trying to destroy what they had built. The Alliance offered what the Council never could: true partnership between equals, technology sharing that benefited everyone, protection that did not require tribute payments, trade deals that were fair to all parties involved. Most importantly, they offered hope to species that had given up on ever being free from Council domination. Captain Oh Min-ho, who was now Admiral of the Alliance fleet, arrived for the morning briefing carrying reports that would have been considered impossible just 2 years earlier. Human exploration teams had discovered 17 new habitable worlds in the past month. Advanced manufacturing stations were producing goods that surpassed anything the Council could make. 3 new species had made first contact and immediately requested to join the Alliance. The most significant development was the completion of the Kepler Gate network, a faster-than-light transportation system that connected all Alliance worlds without depending on Council infrastructure. Any species that joined the Alliance gained access to the network, while Council members found themselves increasingly isolated as their own gate system fell into disrepair. Admiral O activated a holographic display showing the current political map of the galaxy. The green areas representing Alliance territory now covered more space than the red Council zones. Several former Council strongholds were completely surrounded by Alliance systems, cutting them off from their supply lines and forcing them to negotiate for basic necessities. The Council sends another request for emergency negotiations every week, Admiral O reported, but they still refuse to admit they made any mistakes. They want to return to the old system where they held all the power and made all the decisions. They cannot understand that the galaxy has moved beyond them. President Kim nodded as he studied the reports. The Council had created their own problem by treating other species as inferior. They had assumed that military force and economic pressure would always be enough to maintain control. They never considered that their subjects might find a better alternative. Human alliance had succeeded because it offered something the Council could not: a system based on mutual respect instead of domination, technology sharing instead of hoarding, scientific cooperation instead of competition. Most importantly, they offered hope to species that had been told for centuries that they were not good enough to govern themselves. Dr. Yoon-jae joined the meeting carrying her latest research reports. The Alliance scientific program was making discoveries that seemed impossible under the old Council restrictions. When species were allowed to share knowledge freely instead of keeping secrets for a competitive advantage, the rate of progress increased dramatically. We have breakthrough news, she announced. The joint research project with the Keeper Archives has yielded remarkable results. We now understand how to create stable wormholes for instantaneous travel across galactic distances. The implications for exploration and colonization are enormous. President Kim smiled as he realized what this meant. The Alliance would soon have technology that made Council space seem like a primitive backwater. Any species still loyal to the old system would find themselves trapped in an increasingly isolated and backward region while the rest of the galaxy moved forward into a new age.